Senator Shaheen has kindly allowed me to swap places with her in the order, and then she'll take the helm until Senator Menendez returns. I want to thank you for the testimony. It's been very helpful. And Dr. Kendall-Taylor, I just want to underline a point you made. I think that the 300,000, mostly young Russians who have departed the country, some to avoid war, but some out of protest over the war, is a valuable resource for us, both in terms of understanding more deeply what the internal dynamic is, but also potentially to help organize pressure because they want to continue to see improvements in their home country. So I really appreciate that suggestion. How big a deal is it that Finland is in NATO and Sweden, it's just a matter of time that they're going to be in NATO, both in terms of the military capacity of NATO, but also just sort of in the psychology of these two nations where polling for NATO accession would have been under 30% for decades, even up to 3 or 4 years ago, are now realizing they want to be part of NATO. How big a deal is that?
So what we've seen so far is obviously Putin has very much tried to play down Finland's entry and Sweden's eventual entry, in large part because the Russian military is so focused and overwhelmed with what's happening in Ukraine. And in fact, what we've seen is many of Russian forces that are stationed in the west of the country have been redeployed to the east. So he has very much had to play it down. But I think that we should expect that over time that there will be more of a military response to Finland and Sweden's entry into NATO. I think most immediately we're looking at hybrid tactics that Russia will try, right? Incursions into airspace, GPS jamming, all of those types of things just to express its displeasure. But over time, I think Russia will see a threat. I mean, when you think about now the kind of security architecture of the region has been fundamentally altered. The Baltic Sea is now basically ringed by NATO members, with the exception of Kaliningrad. The other key change for Russia, as I talked about, is as its conventional forces are being degraded, Russia is going to place more importance and rely more heavily on its nuclear weapons. The Kola Peninsula in the Arctic is critical from that perspective. And so there are these changes in the security architecture that Russia will see, not just around the Black Sea, but more frequent and more sophisticated NATO exercises in the area, closer integration of intelligence, the very capable intelligence collection assets that Finland and Sweden have. So Russia will be looking at an altered threat picture, and we should expect that over time they will take increasingly more aggressive steps up into that Arctic region. And so the United States, and particularly NATO, are going to need to be prepared. So in the near term, Russia's military is degraded. Mm-hmm. We should expect more of the hybrid threats, but I do think over the long term, that is a significant change that Russia will react and respond to. They're also likely to view the Arctic as a region where they can remind the world that they are a great power, so more kind of provocative actions that they could take in the region. And the last thing I would highlight, too, is the Russia-China dynamic in the Arctic. So as Russia is becoming increasingly dependent on China, they are going to have to toe the line on Chinese interests. We know China wants to play a larger role in the Arctic. So what might Russia be willing to concede to China in the Arctic? That's a question we need to be watching. Already, Russia and China have signed a cooperation agreement of their coast guards. That's the first. It's really an interesting data point because historically Russia has wanted to keep China out of the Arctic because it feels its own sphere.
Let me segue on that,
yes,
Ambassador
please.
Sullivan, on the Russia-China relationship. You know, I've been asking about this for years, the increasing closeness of the countries, and multiple administrations of both parties have tended to say you don't need to worry about the history of enmity between these countries, suggests that there won't be but too much cooperation between them. I never really believe that to be the case. It seems like they're growing closer and closer. There's a dominant partner and a lesser partner, but they both seem pretty designed to work closely together to battle the West, or however they want to put it. Is that your sense, Ambassador Sullivan?
Oh, absolutely, and I can quote President Xi. And President Xi, when he's leaving Moscow after his meeting with President Putin, as he's walking out the door, he looks at Putin and says, the changes that we're making in the world, they're unlike any that have seen, the world has seen in 100 years. We're changing the system, you and I. And Putin looked at him and said, I agree. Absolutely. This is a very troubling partnership. And to follow up on Dr. Kendall Taylor's point, China has always tried to characterize itself as a near Arctic power, and the Russians have resisted that quite rightly. But I think it's going to be more difficult for them to resist that. I note, for example, that Russia yesterday threatened to withdraw. It was for the last 2 years chair of the Arctic Council, withdraw from the Arctic Council. And as I said, I think the Russians really didn't understand what I was saying when I said it. If China's a near Arctic power, then that gives me some hope to pitch for the Red Sox. I can just describe myself as a near starting pitcher for the Red Sox. Why not? Facts are facts, right? So, but the China partnership is vital for Putin. Important and something that Xi will leverage, but vital for Putin.
Can I make one very quick point, Senator, which is, I think so it's important for Putin, but it also amplifies the China challenge. And this is what we'll have to watch, is that, again, as they're increasingly dependent, especially in the military domain, Russia will be sending increasingly sophisticated military systems, submarine quieting, and other things that basically make the Chinese a more capable military. They are getting data from Ukraine. They don't have combat experience. They're training, they're exercising, they're accessing data to train their AI. So Russia amplifies the China challenge and makes it more formidable adversary in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you. Thank you to Senator Kaine for presiding. Senator Romney.